That afternoon, I signed a receipt for a certified envelope that proved my parents had sold something they insisted had never belonged to me. I stood barefoot on the front porch with a grocery bag hanging from my wrist, staring at the return address of a law office I had never heard of. The envelope was thick, heavier than ordinary mail, and my name, Evelyn Carter, was typed in crisp black letters across the front. I almost left it unopened on the kitchen counter. Almost. At 34, I wasn't expecting surprises from lawyers. I rented a small craftsman house outside Columbus, taught American history at the local high school, and lived a life that was steady enough to be mistaken for boring. I liked it that way. After years of family tension, predictability felt earned. My parents still lived in the same white farmhouse where I'd grown up, 45 minutes away. My younger brother, Mason, lived only 10 miles from them with his wife and 2 little girls. We saw each other on holidays. We texted about birthdays. We pretended the distance between us was measured in miles instead of things we'd never learned to say. The envelope changed that. Inside were photocopies of property records, a settlement statement, and a handwritten note clipped to the top. Ms. Carter. I recently retired and have been closing inactive client files. During that process I discovered documentation indicating that you may not have been informed of certain transactions involving property held in trust after your grandfather's death. I believe these records should have been delivered to you years ago. My apologies for the oversight. The note was signed by an attorney named Richard Hensley. I frowned. Property held in trust? My grandfather, Harold Dawson, had died nearly 14 years earlier. I remembered the funeral, the crowded fellowship hall after the service, the smell of coffee and pound cake, my grandmother sitting with folded hands while everyone spoke about Grandpa's generosity. I also remembered what my father had told me afterward. There wasn't much left, Evie. Medical bills took most of it. I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? The photocopies underneath the letter told a different story. The first page listed a parcel of farmland, 42 acres just outside Willow Creek. The second page showed it had been sold. The third page listed the sellers. Thomas Carter and Linda Carter, acting as trustees. Sale price: $684,000. I read the number 3 times before my brain accepted it. Nearly $700,000. My grandfather had owned land? Not only owned it. Sold through my parents? My heartbeat became strangely loud. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it belonged to my parents all along. Maybe Grandpa had transferred it before he died. Maybe. My eyes caught another line near the bottom. Beneficiary, Evelyn Grace Carter, age 20, distribution deferred according to Article 7. My throat tightened. Beneficiary. My name. 20 years old. Distribution deferred. I turned the page with suddenly unsteady hands. The next document was incomplete, as though copied from an old file whose edges had faded. Only one sentence had been highlighted. No sale shall occur without written acknowledgement by the beneficiary. I blinked. Then I looked at the closing statement again. There was a signature beside the acknowledgement requirement. Evelyn G. Carter. Except. It wasn't mine. Not even close. By 6 that evening I had convinced myself there was some clerical mistake. Law offices made mistakes. County records made mistakes. Names repeated across generations. Someone else named Evelyn. Anything except what my mind kept whispering. My parents forged her signature. I drove to the county recorder's office anyway. It closed at 5. I sat in the parking lot for almost 10 minutes before admitting I'd wasted the trip. The folder rested on the passenger seat. Every stoplight home felt longer than the last. I called Mason. He answered on the 4th ring. Hey, sis. You busy? Making dinosaur-shaped pancakes for girls who insist it's dinner. I almost smiled. Almost. Mason, did Grandpa own land? Silence. Not long. Just long enough. I think he had some acreage years ago. Years ago? I don't really know. You never heard about it? I was 12 when Grandpa died. So was I. Another pause. Why are you asking? I looked at the folder. Because I just got paperwork saying Mom and Dad sold it. What? They sold it. I've never heard that. My name is listed as beneficiary. What are you talking about? I don't know. His voice lost its usual warmth. Send me pictures. I will. Evelyn. Yeah? If this is real. He stopped. If what? I don't think Mom and Dad would lie. I stared through the windshield. I used to think that too. The county records office opened at 8 the next morning. I was waiting outside at 7:45 with coffee that had already gone cold. The clerk helping me couldn't have been older than 25. She smiled politely. What can I look up for you? I slid the parcel number across the counter. I'm trying to understand ownership history. She typed quietly. The keyboard click sounded unusually loud. What? The records are archived, but yes. She turned the monitor slightly. There were multiple transfers. I leaned closer. The screen listed dates. My grandfather's ownership. His death. Trust registration. Then. Sale. 11 years earlier. Exactly as the papers said. Can I get certified copies? Sure. While she printed them, I wandered toward a bulletin board filled with local history photographs. Black and white barns. Harvest festivals. Old baseball teams. A familiar face caught my attention. My grandfather. He stood beside 3 other farmers breaking ground for a community irrigation project decades ago. Someone had handwritten the names beneath the photo. Harold Dawson. Frank Merrill. George Collins. Samuel Price. A woman arranging pamphlets noticed me staring. You knew Harold? He was my grandfather. Her face brightened. Oh goodness. You remember him? Everyone remembered Harold. She smiled with genuine affection. He used to say land wasn't something you owned. I looked back at the picture. What do you mean? He'd laugh and say, we're borrowing it from the next generation. Something settled heavily in my stomach. Borrowing it. Not selling it. The certified copies confirmed every detail. Trust. Sale. Signatures. Recording dates. Nothing looked accidental. As I gathered the papers, the older clerk at the next desk glanced toward my folder. Dawson property? I nodded. You related? My grandfather. He hesitated. I remember when that closed. You do? Small town. He shrugged. People notice things. What things? He rubbed the back of his neck. Never mind. No. I stepped closer. What things? His expression shifted from casual to cautious. I shouldn't speculate. I'm not asking for speculation. He looked around before lowering his voice. I always thought it was odd your grandfather's granddaughter wasn't there. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What do you mean? Usually beneficiaries attend closings. I didn't even know it happened. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh. One tiny word. Yet somehow it carried surprise, confusion, and pity. The drive to Willow Creek took less than 20 minutes. The farmland wasn't difficult to find. A new vineyard covered rolling hills that had once belonged to my grandfather. Rows of grapevines stretched toward the horizon. A weathered stone entrance displayed a polished sign. Willow Ridge Vineyards. I parked along the shoulder. The air smelled like warm earth and summer leaves. It was beautiful. Painfully beautiful. A man driving a utility cart waved. You visiting? I think so. He parked nearby. You interested in a tasting? I laughed softly. Not exactly. He introduced himself as Daniel, the vineyard manager. When I explained my grandfather had once owned the land, his face softened. Oh. You remember him? I wasn't here then. He nodded toward the farmhouse in the distance. But Martha might. Who's Martha? Our oldest employee. Would she mind talking? I doubt it. Martha looked to be in her late 70s. She wore gardening gloves and moved carefully but with surprising energy. When Daniel introduced me, she stared for several long seconds. You have Harold's eyes. No one had ever said that before. My mother always said I looked like Dad. Martha smiled sadly. Not today. We sat beneath the shade of a maple tree overlooking the vineyard. She listened quietly as I explained why I'd come. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she looked across the vines. Harold loved this place. I know. He planted every oak along that fence. I followed her gaze. They're enormous now. He would have liked that. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Finally she spoke again. He told me once he hoped you'd raise your children here. I stared at her. What? You. She looked directly at me. He talked about you all the time. My chest tightened. I was only 20 when he died. I know. He never said that. He didn't have to. She folded her gloves into her lap. He worried about what would happen after he was gone. I leaned forward. Did he ever mention a trust? She nodded slowly. Yes. My breath caught. He asked whether I thought young people needed time before inheriting something important. What did you tell him? I said yes. And? He laughed. She smiled faintly. Then Evelyn gets it when she's ready. The words settled over me like cold rain. He had planned it. He had thought about me. He had wanted me to have it. So why was it sold? Martha's smile disappeared. I don't know. You never asked? I did. And? She hesitated. Your father told everyone keeping the land wasn't possible. Because? He said it was what Harold wanted. My hands curled around the folder resting in my lap. What if that wasn't true? Martha looked at me for a long moment. Then someone owes you an explanation. That evening I drove to my parents' farmhouse without calling first. The porch light was already on though the sun hadn't fully set. Mom answered the door wearing an apron dusted with flour. Evelyn. She smiled. What a surprise. I held up the folder. We need to talk. Her smile disappeared before I said another word. She looked past me toward the driveway. Your father isn't home yet. I'll wait. She stepped aside without arguing. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had when I was 16. The same clock. The same family photographs. The same braided rug by the fireplace. Only now I noticed one thing missing. Every picture of Grandpa had disappeared. I didn't remember when that happened. Or why. An hour later my father's truck pulled into the driveway. He walked inside carrying a toolbox. Evie. Then he saw the papers. His shoulders stiffened. What is this? I placed the certified copies on the kitchen table. I want you to explain why my signature is on documents I never signed. The room became impossibly quiet. Mom stopped wiping the counter. Dad didn't move. He looked down at the papers. Then at me. Then back again. Finally he spoke. I wondered when those would come back. Every nerve in my body went still. Not denial. Not confusion. Recognition. He knew exactly what they were. And in that moment, before he said another word, I realized the mystery wasn't whether my parents had hidden something from me. It was how much more they were still hiding. I'd barely finished processing my father's words when my mother pulled out a chair and sat down as if her knees had suddenly given out. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor. Dad set his toolbox beside the door with unusual care, almost as though making too much noise would shatter whatever fragile balance still existed in the room. "I think," he said quietly, "we should all sit." "I'm fine standing." "Evie." "No." My voice surprised even me. It wasn't loud. It was tired. I've spent 14 years believing Grandpa died with nothing. I've spent 11 years not knowing a piece of land that was apparently meant for me was sold. I've just learned someone signed my name to legal papers. I pushed the folder toward him. "So I'd rather stand." Dad rested both hands on the back of a kitchen chair. "I understand why you're angry." "You don't." "I do." "No, you understand why I'm asking questions." I swallowed hard. "You don't understand what it feels like to discover your own parents kept something this big from you." Mom finally looked up. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." I stared at her. "Then how was it supposed to happen?" Neither of them answered. The old grandfather clock in the living room ticked loudly enough to fill the silence. Finally Dad picked up one of the documents. "Where did you get these?" "A retired attorney mailed them to me." "Richard? You know him?" He nodded once. "I haven't spoken to him in years. He says these records should have been delivered to me." Dad closed his eyes briefly. I was afraid that file still existed. My stomach tightened. "So you admit it?" "I admit the paperwork is real." "The forged signature?" His jaw flexed. "I didn't sign your name." "Then who did?" "I don't know." The answer came too quickly. Too neatly. I didn't believe it. "I want one thing," I said. "The truth." Dad pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "You'll have it." "When?" "When you're willing to hear the whole story." "I've been willing for 14 years." He rubbed a hand across his face, looking older than I had ever seen him. "It's complicated." I almost laughed. "It always is." Mom reached for my hand. I stepped back before she could touch me. The hurt that crossed her face lasted only a second, but I saw it. "You think we stole from you," she whispered. "I think someone did." Dad looked at her before speaking. "Linda." She nodded faintly. He turned back to me. "When your grandfather died, the farm wasn't worth anything close to what it eventually sold for. I've seen the sale price. That came years later." "So?" "The property taxes were increasing every year. The irrigation system had failed. The old barn was collapsing. None of that explains why you sold it without telling me." "I know." "Then explain that." Again, silence. It was becoming its own language. "I need some air," I said. Without waiting for permission, I walked out the back door. The backyard hadn't changed much since childhood. The swing Dad had built still hung beneath the maple tree, the one chain had begun to rust. The vegetable garden was smaller now. Grandma's rose bushes were gone. I walked toward the fence line where an old wooden bench overlooked the pasture. Someone had recently sanded and repainted it. I sat. The evening air smelled of cut hay. A few minutes later the screen door creaked. Mom joined me. She sat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving nearly 3 feet between us. "When I was little, this was where we'd shell peas together in the summer." Neither of us mentioned that. "I kept every birthday card your grandfather ever gave you," she said. I frowned. "What?" "They're in the attic." "Why?" I couldn't throw them away. I didn't know they existed. You weren't supposed to. I turned toward her. That's becoming a pattern. She let out a long breath. Your grandfather didn't trust your father. The words landed harder than I expected. What? He loved him. That's not the same thing. No. She shook her head. It isn't. I searched her face. So that's why he created the trust? She hesitated. I think so. You think? He never told me directly. But you suspected. Yes. I waited. She looked toward the darkening field. He believed your father made decisions too quickly. I almost smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. He always said Thomas could solve today's problem while creating tomorrow's. I remembered hearing something similar years ago. At the time I'd assumed it was harmless teasing. Now I wasn't so sure. Dad appeared a few minutes later carrying 3 mugs of coffee. He offered me one. I hesitated before taking it. Not because I wanted coffee. Because refusing would have felt like giving up on the conversation before it truly began. He remained standing. I've told myself this story 1,000 times, he said. I've rehearsed it. Then stop rehearsing. His eyes met mine. I never wanted that land. Then why sell it? Because 6 months after your grandfather died. He stopped. His gaze drifted toward the barn. Everything changed. What changed? Our debt. I frowned. What debt? He looked genuinely surprised. You don't know? No. I thought your mother. She slowly shook her head. We agreed never to tell them. Told us what? Dad stared into his coffee. The bank was preparing to foreclose on this farm. The words hit me unexpectedly. I looked around the property. The farmhouse. The barn. The fields were Mason and I had played tag until sunset. This farm? He nodded. We were 3 months behind. Why? The recession. You both had jobs. We also had loans. He laughed bitterly. Too many. I had never imagined my parents struggling financially. They never talked about money. Not once. Dad continued. The dairy operation failed. We lost equipment. I borrowed against everything. And then your grandfather died. I listened without interrupting. He knew we were in trouble. So he left you the land? No. He left it to you. Then why are we talking about your debts? His expression became unreadable. Because your grandmother asked us to save the family. My heartbeat quickened. What does that mean? It means your grandmother believed losing this farm would destroy what was left of the family. So she wanted you to sell Grandpa's land. Dad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Mom. She quietly nodded. She begged us. I stared at both of them. Did she put that in writing? No. Did the trust allow it? No. So she asked you to break Grandpa's wishes. Mom's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't that simple. It sounds exactly that simple. Dad finally sat down on the edge of the bench. The night after the funeral, your grandmother told us she didn't care what Harold's papers said. I blinked. What? She said she'd rather disappoint a dead husband than lose her living family. The sentence echoed in my head. It was heartbreaking. And yet, it still didn't explain the forged signature. Or why no one had told me. Or why every photograph of Grandpa had vanished from the house. I looked back toward the kitchen window. Something caught my attention. An old metal box sat on top of the refrigerator. I'd never seen it before. Dad. He followed my gaze. What? That gray box. For the first time that evening. He looked nervous. Mom turned toward the window, and all the color drained from her face. Neither of them spoke. I stood. What's in it? Dad slowly set down his coffee mug. It belongs to your grandfather. I took one step toward the house. Then another. Behind me, my father's voice was barely above a whisper. Evie. I stopped but didn't turn around. If you open that box tonight, he said, there won't be any way for this family to go back. I reached for the back door anyway. Chapter 1, Part 3. My father's warning followed me all the way to the kitchen. If you open that box tonight, there won't be any way for this family to go back. I rested my hand on the doorknob but didn't answer. Deep down, I already knew he was right. Whatever was inside that gray metal box wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was the line between the family I'd believed I had and the one I was only beginning to discover. I stepped inside. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. Mom remained outside on the bench. Dad came in behind me, closing the screen door gently. Neither of us spoke. The gray box sat on top of the refrigerator, just beyond my reach. It looked old. Its once blue paint had faded into dull gray, and rust had formed around the hinges. A tiny brass lock hung from the front. Unlocked. I reached for it. Dad didn't stop me. Instead, he quietly said, before you open it, I need you to know your grandfather put that box together himself. I looked at him. You've had it all these years? He nodded. Since the day after the funeral. And you never thought I deserved to know? I thought I was protecting you. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That seems to be everyone's favorite excuse. Without another word, I lifted the box down onto the kitchen table. Dust scattered across the wood. For a long moment, none of us moved. Finally, I unlatched the lock. The lid creaked open. Inside were neatly organized envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. Several small notebooks. A leather wallet. An old pocket watch. And a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Grandpa's unmistakably careful handwriting, were 7 words. For Evelyn, when she asks the right question. My throat tightened. He wrote this for me? Dad nodded once. Yes. Why didn't you give it to me? His eyes filled with regret. Because I was afraid of what question you'd ask. I carefully picked up the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. The seal had never been broken. My fingers trembled. Mom walked back into the kitchen just then. The moment she saw the envelope, she covered her mouth. I forgot that was in there, she whispered. Dad looked at her. No. His voice was calm. You tried to forget. No one argued. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. There was no legal language. No complicated instructions. Just Grandpa's handwriting. Dear Edie. If you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped never would. You were always curious. I figured one day you'd ask the question everyone else avoided. If this letter reached you naturally, then your parents kept their promise. If someone else had to give it to you, then the promise was broken. I stopped reading. The room became perfectly still. I looked up. What promise? Neither of my parents answered. I looked back at the page. I love your parents. But love doesn't always make people strong when fear gets involved. If they have hidden this letter from you, don't judge them before you know why. Fear makes ordinary people believe impossible choices are the only choices left. I swallowed hard. Those words didn't sound like someone expecting betrayal. They sounded like someone who expected desperation. I continued reading. The land is only part of your inheritance. The money is only part of the story. The most valuable thing I leave behind cannot be sold. My heartbeat quickened. I flipped the page over. Nothing. That was the end of the letter. Just 3 short paragraphs. I searched the envelope again. Empty. That's it? Dad quietly nodded. That's all he left? No. He looked toward the notebooks inside the box. That's just where he wanted you to begin. I reached for the first notebook. Its cover read, Farm Journal, 1987. The next, Farm Accounts. Another, Personal Notes. Then one smaller notebook with no title at all. I opened it. The first several pages were blank. Halfway through, handwriting appeared. Not Grandpa's. Someone else's. The ink was darker. The letters leaned sharply to the right. Whose writing is this? Dad frowned. I don't know. Mom leaned closer. I've never seen that before. I turned another page. Every entry was dated. But not by year. Only month and day. The first sentence sent a chill through me. Harold thinks he's protecting Evelyn. He has no idea what they're planning. I looked up so quickly the notebook nearly slipped from my hands. They? No one answered. I turned another page. The next entry was shorter. Thomas still doesn't know everything. Linda suspects more than she says. My eyes moved from the notebook to my parents. Dad looked genuinely confused. Mom looked frightened. What is this? I whispered. Dad slowly shook his head. I've never read that. I believed him. For the first time since arriving, I truly believed him. Because whatever this notebook was, it had surprised him just as much as it had surprised me. Then something small fell from between its pages. A photograph. I picked it up. It showed Grandpa standing beside a woman I had never seen before. They were smiling. Behind them stood the farmhouse. Written across the bottom in fading blue ink were 5 words. The truth starts with Eleanor. I turned the photograph over. There was an address. Not far away. Less than 15 miles from where we were sitting. I looked at my parents. Who is Eleanor? Dad's face went completely blank. Mom slowly sank into a chair. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said the words I never expected to hear. I prayed you would never find her name.